Somewhere in rural Japan, there is a rice field that has been producing food every single year since the 800s. No plow has touched it. No fertilizer bag has been emptied into it. No agronomist has visited to advise on soil health, crop rotation, or chemical treatment. The land has simply kept producing, through wars, famines, regime changes, and the entire arc of what we now call modern civilization. Think about what that actually means. The United States hasn't existed for 300 years yet. The oldest continuously operating company in the world, a Japanese temple construction firm called Kongo Gumi, ran for about 1,400 years before it was finally absorbed into a conglomerate in 2006. This field has been feeding people for a comparable stretch of time, without a single upgrade, without a single bag of anything purchased, and without breaking down. Every principle modern agriculture is built on says this should be impossible. Soil depletes, nutrients get used up, pests build resistance, fields need to rest. The science is clear, the textbooks agree, and the fertilizer industry has built a trillion-dollar business on exactly that logic. So how does a field ignore all of it for 12 centuries and keep working? The answer involves a system so intricate and so well-engineered that when outside experts finally encountered it in the 20th century, their response wasn't admiration. It was a recommendation to shut it down and replace it with something more modern. This is the story of what they found, what they didn't understand, and what got lost when they got their way. Welcome to Lost Green Law. If you enjoy this kind of content, you will really help us out if you could like the video and hit that subscribe button. Thank you. Now moving on. To understand the Satoyama system, you first have to stop thinking about it as a farm. It wasn't one. A farm, in the way most people understand the word, is a defined plot of land where one or a few crops are grown. You put inputs in, you take food out. The Satoyama was something different. A fully designed landscape that happened to produce food as one of many outputs, the way a forest produces timber while also managing water, hosting wildlife, and stabilizing soil. The layout went roughly like this. At the base of the landscape sat the rice paddies, flooded fields arranged in terraces along valley floors. Feeding those paddies was a network of irrigation ponds and channels that moved water deliberately across the whole system. Beyond the paddies sat grasslands used for grazing animals and harvesting thatch. Above the grasslands grew the coppiced woodland, managed forest with trees that were cut on rotation to keep them producing young, nutrient-rich growth. And threaded through all of it was the village, whose residents were not just the consumers of this system, but its active maintenance crew. Nothing in this landscape was decorative or accidental. The fish that lived in the irrigation channels naturally controlled insect populations and contributed organic matter to the water flowing into the fields. The grasslands prevented erosion on the slopes above the paddies. The woodland above the grasslands regulated how much water reached the paddies during heavy rains, acting as a natural buffer against flood and drought alike. Even the specific trees chosen for coppicing, oaks and other deciduous species, were selected because their leaf litter was particularly useful as fertilizer when carried down to the fields. Scholars use the term Satoshi Satoyama to describe this, Satoshi for the cultivated lowland zone, Satoyama for the managed woodland zone above it. The two worked as one continuous system, and separating them, as later observers would try to do, was like trying to understand a circulatory system by only looking at the heart. And at the center of that heart sat the paddy field, the most productive, the most scrutinized, and the most misunderstood piece of the entire landscape. You see, the paddy field is the most visible part of the Satoyama, and it's also the part that confused outside observers the most. Specifically, the question that baffled Western agricultural experts when they first studied these fields was, how does the same ground produce rice year after year, for centuries, without any of the soil management techniques that Western farming considered essential? In conventional dryland farming, continuous cropping is a problem. When you grow the same crop in the same soil repeatedly, a few things happen. Nutrients get depleted because the crop keeps drawing from the same reservoir. Soil structure breaks down because roots and decomposition work the same layers over and over. Pathogens, fungi, bacteria, nematodes build up because their preferred host keeps growing in the same place. The standard solutions are crop rotation, fallowing, and of course, tillage, which physically disrupts the soil to interrupt pest cycles and aerate compacted layers. The paddy field did none of this, and it worked better than fields that did all of it. The reason is water. Flooding a field does something remarkably similar to plowing, but without the physical disruption. The standing water suppresses weeds by cutting off light and oxygen to their seeds. It resets soil chemistry by creating anaerobic conditions that break down organic matter differently than dry soil does. And it prevents the pathogen buildup that plagues dryland monocultures by fundamentally changing the microbial environment every season. A pathogen that thrives in dry, aerated soil often cannot survive being submerged for months at a time. Think of it like this. If you run a restaurant kitchen and you want to prevent bacteria from building up on your surfaces, you can either scrub everything with a brush, that's tillage, or you can flood the whole kitchen with boiling water, that's flooding. Both work. One leaves the kitchen intact. The paddy took the second approach for 1200 years, and the kitchen was still in perfect condition. Now, here's where the Satoyama gets genuinely surprising. The flooded paddy explains why the soil doesn't break down, but flooding alone doesn't explain why the soil keeps producing without any nutrients being added from outside. For that, you need to look up the hill, at the woodland. Japanese agricultural researchers identified a ratio that reframes the entire system once you understand it. Sustaining 1 unit of productive paddy field required a managed woodland roughly 10 times its size, 10 to 1. The paddy was never a self-contained unit. It was the visible output of a much larger biological machine running in the background. Here's how the transfer worked. Villagers would go into the coppiced woodland seasonally and collect fallen leaves, cut undergrowth, and gather organic material. This was carried down to the paddies and incorporated into the soil, or composted first and then applied. The woodland, through its ongoing growth and decomposition cycle, was effectively manufacturing fertility and exporting it downhill. Every leaf that fell from an oak in October was, in practical terms, a slow-release fertilizer capsule on its way to the field below. The irrigation system made this even more efficient. Water flowing through the channels picked up dissolved organic material from the forest floor, carrying additional nutrients directly into the paddy water. Fish and aquatic invertebrates living in those channels added biological matter of their own. By the time water entered the paddy, it had already been enriched by its journey through the landscape above. This is why the system produced so reliably for so long. It had no dependence on external inputs because it had designed itself around using everything the local landscape produced. The woodland wasn't scenery surrounding a farm. It was the farm's supply chain, running on rainfall and sunlight and requiring no invoice. But even with the woodland fertility transfer accounted for, soil scientists studying traditional Japanese paddies found something that still didn't add up. The nitrogen levels in long-term unfertilized paddies were higher than the organic inputs alone could explain. Something else was contributing nitrogen to these fields, and for a long time, nobody knew what it was. The answer turned out to be living in the mud. Flooded paddy soil is anaerobic, meaning it contains very little oxygen. That's not an environment most organisms thrive in, but it suits a specific group of bacteria extremely well. Iron-reducing, nitrogen-fixing microorganisms that pull nitrogen directly from the atmosphere and deposit it into the soil. Dryland farming destroys this microbial community. Every time you plow, you introduce oxygen into the soil, which kills anaerobic bacteria and fundamentally changes the microbial ecosystem. The paddy field, by never being plowed and by staying flooded for months at a time, maintained the exact conditions these organisms needed to flourish. Long-term field experiments at Japanese research stations put a number on this. Rice plots that received zero nitrogen fertilizer for over 35 years still produced roughly 70% of the yields achieved by plots receiving standard fertilization. The difference was being sustained entirely by biological nitrogen fixation in the flooded soil. The field was feeding itself through a microbial workforce the farmers never hired, never managed, and never knew existed. Masanobu Fukuoka, the Japanese farmer and soil scientist who would later become one of the most important agricultural thinkers of the 20th century, spent years trying to explain this dynamic to skeptical audiences. His point was simple. The traditional paddy farmer wasn't maintaining a system through skill or knowledge of soil science. They were maintaining the conditions that allowed the system to maintain itself. There's a meaningful difference between the two, and it's a difference most modern agriculture ignores entirely. By the Edo period, roughly 1603 to 1868, the Satoyama system was operating at what historians consider its peak. Japan's population had grown substantially, cities were expanding, and the demand for rice, timber, fuel, and raw materials was higher than it had ever been. The Satoyama landscape was supplying most of it. And the reason it could do that, while still remaining intact after centuries of use, comes down to something less visible than the ecology. It comes down to governance. Every element of the Satoyama was managed under a system of collective village rules. The woodland was a commons, shared land with defined rights and enforced limits. Who could cut trees, which trees, how many, in which season? All of this was regulated. A villager who overharvested their allocated share of the coppice wasn't just being selfish. They were drawing down the fertility reserve that fed their neighbors' paddies, and they would face social consequences for it. Records from Edo period villages showed disputes over woodland access being adjudicated at the community level, with penalties for violations that could include loss of access rights. The irrigation pond schedules were similarly managed. Water in a shared system is one of the quickest paths to conflict. Ask anyone who has farmed in a dry region. But the Satoyama villages developed allocation systems that were precise enough to prevent shortfall and flexible enough to accommodate variation between wet and dry years. What this meant in practice was that the ecology worked because the social structure worked. The forest stayed productive because overcutting was penalized. The paddies stayed fertile because the woodland stayed intact. You could not separate the biological system from the human one. They were the same system, expressed at two different scales. And that interdependence, invisible to anyone looking only at the fields, is what outside observers would consistently fail to see when they arrived in the 20th century. When American occupation forces entered Japan after 1945, they brought with them a set of assumptions about what good farming looked like. It looked like American farming, large, mechanized, chemically supported, and oriented toward maximum yield. Japan's traditional agricultural landscapes, with their small paddies and managed woodlands and village commons, did not fit that picture. They looked, from a certain angle, like poverty, like backwardness, like a country that hadn't yet been shown how to do things properly. Fukuoka watched this transformation with what he later described as indignation. He saw farmers abandon the leaf litter composting runs to the woodland because chemical fertilizer was now available in a bag and took less labor. He saw the coppice cycles slow and then stop as households switched from charcoal to petroleum for fuel, removing the economic reason to keep cutting the trees on rotation. He saw the irrigation ponds go uncleared because the social structures that had organized collective maintenance were dissolving as young people moved to cities for factory work. Japan's 1961 Agricultural Basic Act formalized much of this disruption at the policy level. Designed to modernize Japanese agriculture and increase farm incomes, it pushed land consolidation and mechanization, which meant that the small, irregular, hand-managed paddies that formed the Satoyama were exactly the kind of farming it was designed to eliminate. Agricultural extension workers, operating under this framework, were not celebrating the 1,000-year paddy. They were recommending that farmers replace it with something more rational. The chemical inputs that replaced the woodland-to-field nutrient cycle were not presented as a trade-off. They were presented as progress. And in the short term, yields went up. Nobody was measuring what was happening to the woodland above, or to the soil biology underneath, or to the governance structures that had held it all together. So, between 1960 and 1990, roughly one-third of Japan's Satoyama land was lost. Some was converted to housing as cities expanded. Some was left to revert to unmanaged forest as rural populations collapsed. Some was consolidated into large-scale paddy operations that bore no resemblance to the original system. The loss happened fast, and the ecological consequences were visible almost immediately. Without the regular coppicing that kept the woodland open and productive, the forest canopy closed. The light-dependent plants that had grown on the forest floor, many of them edible, medicinal, or ecologically important, disappeared as shade took over. Bamboo, one of the most aggressive colonizers in the Japanese landscape, spread rapidly into the abandoned coppice areas, forming dense monocultures that supported almost no other life. The irrigation ponds that had been cleared and maintained for centuries filled with sediment and vegetation when collective maintenance stopped. The aquatic communities that depended on them, the dragonflies, the salamanders, the freshwater fish, lost their habitat. Firefly populations, which had been abundant in the pond margins and irrigation channels of healthy Satoyama landscapes, crashed across Japan in the 1970s and became a cultural symbol of rural loss. What made this particularly stark was the mechanism of disappearance. These species weren't poisoned, though agricultural chemicals certainly contributed in some areas. They were lost because the specific pattern of human disturbance they had evolved, alongside the seasonal flooding, the coppice cutting, the pond clearing, had stopped. The Satoyama's biodiversity had required human interference to survive. Withdraw the interference, and the system didn't return to some pristine natural state. It simplified, degraded, and went quiet. It turned out that the thing that looked like nature had actually been a partnership. and that's it. So now here's a question worth sitting with. If a food system ran without purchased inputs for over 12 centuries, and the system that replaced it cannot function without them, which one was actually more advanced? Share your thoughts in the comment section below. Leave a like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell for more amazing videos like this one.